Tipp today in association with Slattery's of Pecan, your main Peugeot dealer for over 50 years in the Premier County. Slattery'sGarage.ie.
Good morning. Welcome along to Tipp Today. 1800 938 007. That's our free phone number. Won't cost you if you'd like to make a call to us. And Leanne is producing today. Coming up on the show, we'll be hearing from Minister Patrick O'Donovan a little later on in the hour. And Deputy Michael Murphy will speak to us shortly. We'll be joined by Defence Analyst Declan Power. Councillor Liam Brown will share his perspective on the protests. Tom Vaughan will help us find some peace in nature in these very difficult times indeed. After 11, we'll be hearing from Richard Kennedy of the Garda Representative Association, and Dan Harty of Sinn Féin will respond to the protests as well. So all of that and much, much more on the way. You can text and WhatsApp 083 311 3311. You can email tiptoday@tipfm.com. Now this week, Larry O'Keefe's Furniture in Clonmel and Mitchelstown, they've given us a €250 voucher to give away to a lucky listener this week in celebration of their massive sale that is now on, and you have the chance to grab huge reductions, I'm assured, right across the departments, living room, bedroom, dining and more, with unbeatable offers and savings galore. It's the perfect time to transform your home. So if you want to be in with a chance to become a finalist today, and we're giving that away, by the way, on Friday. If you want to be a finalist, all you have to do is get texting or WhatsApping right now Larry O'Keefe. If you just text Larry O'Keefe to 083 311 3311 along with your details, we will pop you in the draw. Now, what a week it was last week. What a weekend it was indeed. The government has signed off on more than €500 million in measures to support those struggling with rising energy costs. It follows almost a week of protests and blockades which disrupted fuel supplies around the country, crippled road networks and indeed brought Dublin city centre to a standstill. Well, Fine Gael Deputy for Tipperary Michael Murphy is chair of the Oireachtas Committee for Transport, and he joins me now from our Clonmel studio. Good morning to you, Michael.
Good morning, Fran.
And thanks very much indeed for coming on with us today. Sinn Féin is to table that motion of no confidence in the government over its handling of the fuel protest. The government has the numbers to counter this, but most would agree, Michael, the handling of this crisis, an absolute disaster.
Yeah, Fran, look, as you said in your opening remarks, it's been a really, really difficult week for so many sectors of society, for families, for workers, farmers, farm contractors, hauliers, and can I also say for government public representatives as well. There's a lot of real frustration out there, and I fully recognise that. I do want to say at the outset as well, Fran, you know, people have a right to have their voices heard. I do want to acknowledge the protests in Tipperary, particularly at Cahir and Cashel, protests that appear to be, you know, well organised and indeed dignified, and I want to recognise that, and I want to put that on the record. You know, what my focus on, Fran, is making sure that engagement that I'm having at the national level and have been having over the last week, you know, leads to solutions, practical solutions that can be implemented immediately. I think people now at this stage, they want clarity, they want focus, and you know, that's where my I suppose priority lays. I do just want to, at the outset as well, Fran, if you would allow me, just, you know, I do think we need to lower the temperature a small bit, and I would appeal to people. Look, there's been a lot of engagement with my office over the last 72 hours, and I'm available to engage, I'm available to meet, but I would just ask people in particular, in terms of any engagement with my staff, just to be respectful. They're doing their best, and yeah,
I'm sure they are, Michael, but you know, a lot of the rise in the temperature could be put down to how the government handled this, and it was a bit cack-handled.
Look, and I'm not denying that, Fran. I think there's, you know, if I'm to be perfectly honest, I think there's been fault on both sides. My priority has always been to listen, to engage constructively, and deliver solutions that make a real difference. You know, we're in the midst of an energy crisis. Ongoing developments in the Middle East are deeply, deeply concerning. Look, people in the context of their fuel bills, I would describe it as a perfect storm. And in that regard, look, I think last night's announcement is a positive step in the context of further reductions in excise duty, that those reductions have been extended until the 31st of July. I think in the context of petrol, it brings the total reduction to 27 cent a litre. In the context of diesel, 32 cent a litre. I think the decision to defer the next increase in carbon tax was the right decision. We have a really, really good package for hauliers. It's a cash payment, I think, for 1 to 5 vehicles. It's a monthly payment of €1,300. For 5 to 20 vehicles, it's a reduced payment of €700.
So the protests worked, Michael, to some degree. I mean, the government would not have moved on this. Is that not fair to say, without the people getting out on the streets?
Look, the government has been constantly committed, Fran, to keeping these measures under review. And, let me say, and, should things, and I suppose developments in the Middle East develop even further, the government is always prepared to intervene again. And I do want to highlight as well that there's ongoing discussions at European level as well, and I think we need a European-wide intervention as well. Look, are we reacting to protests? I don't think so, Fran. As I said, we made an intervention, I think, 3 weeks into the Middle Eastern war.
Most people viewed as paltry, to be honest, Michael,
Yeah, look, I don't think €250 million at the time. It was one of the most significant interventions at European level. Look, we have another €550 million worth of announcements last night, bringing a total to almost 800 million. But look, it's a really, really difficult situation. Tensions are very, very high. People are really, really struggling. And look, government will always try and do its best. And as I said, that's where my focus on, promoting solutions that can be implemented in a timely manner.
It's something politicians talk about all the time, lessons to be learned. I mean, surely there's lessons to be learned around some of the language used by your own party leader, for example, the Taoiseach, saying a sinister and a despicable attack on our economy and our society. He said under the laws of the land that these people will be dealt with without fear or favour. I mean, these were largely ordinary people brought to the point of their collar.
Yeah, look, as I said, Fran, look, and language is very important, and I recognise that, and I think some of the language used by government wasn't helpful to the situation, and particularly, calls for the Defence Forces to intervene. Look, I think we just
was that a mistake, Michael?
I think it was, and I also think we just need to move on. We all need to work together if we're, get back to that kind of spirit of that community spirit. This is a crisis. It's an unprecedented crisis. It's not a domestic failure. It's to do with an ongoing war in the Middle East, and it's not going to be easy over the next number of weeks and months for many sectors. And I just hope that the measures announced last night, extended until the end of June, will make some bit of a difference, particularly for hauliers. I just want to welcome the rebate scheme for farmers. I think 120,000 farmers will benefit. For farm contractors, I think 1,500 farm contractors will benefit. That's the rebate scheme of up to 20 cent a litre based on their usage for 2025. And as I said, I've already mentioned a package for hauliers as well. And I do welcome that school transport operators and local link operators are also included in another scheme that will be dealt with through the contract which they're working through.
And what about ordinary people? I mean, I spoke to Margaret last week, and it would bring a tear to a stone. She spoke to me. She was sitting in the cold as she was talking to me because she couldn't afford home heating oil. Nothing has been done about that. What about carers out there? I heard Richie Malloy speak about this over the weekend as well. There's still a lot of people out there, Michael, suffering and dealing with huge amount of difficulty.
Yeah, and look, I'm engaging with those people every week through my office, and I will continue to provide assistance where I can. Look, just to mention the first round of measures, Fran, the fuel allowance, €37 a week, worked up to €1,000 a year, extended by 4 weeks. And a fuel allowance that's significantly more than equivalent payments, be it in Northern Ireland, Spain, where similar payments are only a fifth of what they are
but
here.
It's still a couple of bags of coal.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to be here to say, look, I'm dealing with those. It's very, very difficult for them, Fran. Hopefully, we're heading into, in terms of, rising temperatures, that will make a difference as well. But of course it's very difficult for so many, as you said, carers, all of whom that I'm dealing with through my office, trying to assist them in terms of securing additional needs payments through the social welfare office. I have a number of appointments with social protection even today in that regard. But people are struggling. As I said, I've always been very connected to the ground, as are my colleagues, the Fine Gael councillors on Tipperary County Council as well, and we're there to assist. My office is open, and so many hardship cases. I acknowledge that,
It's interesting, Michael, that, with all of the disruptions of the last week, 56% of people told Ireland Thinks that they agree with the actions of the fuel protesters, while just 38% disagreed. Now, the 56%, they were people who were discommoded. They were people that, found it difficult to go about their daily lives because of the protests, but they still thought it was worthwhile. Is this a big lesson for the government? I
think it is, Fran. Perhaps it could be even a watershed moment for this government. Look, I've many friends that participated in the protests, particularly in Cashel, all of whom were in direct contact with me, all of whom I tried to engage with to the best of my ability. And as I said at the outset, well organised, dignified, and I want to thank them for the extent to which they facilitate the movement of emergency vehicles or people with key medical appointments. I want to put on record, though, Fran, I couldn't get my head around the and sorry, can I just also say that, the right to protest is a cornerstone of our democracy, but I couldn't get my head around the blockades at Whitegate Refinery in particular, and a number of other ports. Like, this protest is essentially about the price of fuel, and I just couldn't get my head around as to why, there were blockades that ultimately disrupted
desperation and frustration, Michael.
Look, perhaps, Fran, and look, lessons definitely to be learned. We had 2 parliamentary party meetings over the weekend. We're all heading up to Dublin today, a day early as well. Obviously, you mentioned the vote of no confidence. There'll be a lot of soul searching. We had a very, I would describe, heated meeting of the parliamentary party last night. I suspect we're going to have a significant debate around carbon tax. The future of the carbon tax. I certainly think it does definitely merit a review. And look, we have
a review in what way, Michael?
Look, I think a review,
review?
You see, carbon tax is currently calculated, if I'm correct, at approximately €70 per tonne of carbon emission. I can't tell you the exact, but it's somewhere around €70 a tonne. But the proposal is to increase it by up to €100 a tonne by 2030. And I think, look, we just need to have a debate around that. I see the merit of the carbon tax in the context of, reducing our dependency on fossil fuels, the retrofitting of homes, other social protection.
It's really only useful for people who have a few bob, though, to be honest with you, Michael. I'm not sure how useful it is for people who are struggling.
Yeah, and and just to add to that as well, this government has made a decision. This was a point I made myself at the parliamentary party meeting last night, Fran. We've 2 rainy day funds, the Future Ireland Fund and the Infrastructure and Climate Fund, and by the end of this year we'll have 24 billion euros in both of those funds. And I've always said it's the right thing to do, to put away money, not to spend all the resources available to the Exchequer. But we're certainly in a rainy day at the moment, and is it time to reach into that pot of money and indeed additional measures? And I think if this war continues, I think energy credits for the forthcoming winter have to be on the table, and I'll be certainly advocating for that within
what about the coalition now at this point? I mean, it appears to me anyway there's certainly a rift between Defence and Justice. Minister McEntee strongly rebuking Jim O'Callaghan for the send in the army statement. Is there a rift there now as well?
Look, I don't think so, Fran, and that's speaking very honestly. Look, there'll always be differences of opinions, but I think there's good cohesion between the coalition partners. Yes, there is a vote of no confidence. Obviously, the government will reverse that and treat it as a vote of confidence. I fully expect the government to win that vote, and as I said, I'll continue to focus on, delivering, suggesting concrete supports, rather than, it'll take up a bit of time, but ultimately it's a meaningless motion. It will be the motion of no confidence will be defeated. Look, we just need to move on. We've made one of the largest, if not now the largest intervention in the European Union. We did that because we know that this crisis is having a profound impact on businesses, on community-specific sectors in particular, Fran. But again, look, it's so difficult out there, and we just need to all work together and try and get through this.
One of the things we learned, I think, over the last week and a half or so is that we do follow international guidance big time. I mean, Micheál Martin came out and said that his guidance was coming from the ECB and the IMF, Michael. They develop frameworks for managing crises like this. Are we not thinking for ourselves here at all? Have we any autonomy at all now at this point?
Well, I think last night's intervention shows the extent of the autonomy we have, Fran. This was a significant package announced last night, 550 million euros, particularly designed to support the haulage and farm contracting sector, and others, a number of measures for fisheries as well. I think there was some suggestion that in terms of the additional reductions in excise, that we formally sought a derogation from the European Union, and I do think that we need to see something, some intervention at the European level, some further intervention at the European level. I know there's this toolkit being expected, but I think we need to see that this week, what measures we can introduce at the European level.
But this is the reason, at least is my understanding, as to why we can't move on home heating oil, for example, because of directives from Europe.
Correct, and we've discussed that directive previously, Fran, and that's why it's absolutely urgent. I think I know Commissioner McGrath is meeting with the Commission President, I think is it today or tomorrow, to discuss this, but I definitely think we need some additional support at the European level, and particularly changes to the directive that will give the government further scope, because I don't think this is over yet. I think latest developments in Iran are deeply concerning. I was very hopeful that we would have a peace deal, and still hopeful that we could have, but look, it's so fluid over there at the moment, and ongoing developments remain a real worry.
Can I finally ask you about the Gardaí and the role they played here? And I'm just wondering, that relationship between the Gardaí and the public, is that really badly damaged because of the last few days?
Yeah, look, nobody wants to, and I certainly don't want to see the scenes that we saw at Whitegate. I think it's important, though, just in the overall context, Fran, just to acknowledge that the other protests, other blockades around the country, at Fines, at Rosslare, at Galway Port, all ended peacefully. Look, An Garda Síochána faced a very difficult, a very unprecedented situation with critical infrastructure being obstructed. I don't know the sequence of events in Whitegate in terms of what warnings were given in advance, but look, I don't want to see pepper spray being used, individuals being dragged from vehicles. It was very, very unfortunate, and yes, look, An Garda Síochána have a very difficult, but I do welcome in other locations around the country, Fran, that all protest blockades ended in a peaceful manner.
All right, and just finally, I mean, you're chair of the Oireachtas Committee on Transport. What role do you have in this now, from your committee's point of view, Michael? We don't have much of a role from a committee perspective. Like the job of the committee is really to scrutinise legislation, accountability in the context of transport spend. If there is, like, we're meeting. We've a special meeting. We don't normally meet until a Wednesday, Fran, but we have a special meeting convened for 6 o'clock tomorrow evening in private to see what we can do. But the approach I'll be taking was with working with
not just colleagues in government that are members of the committee, but colleagues in opposition that are members of the committee, to see where we can go from a committee perspective. But within the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party, within government, I'll continue to be a strong voice. As you said, Fran, it's been a very, very difficult week. Lessons learned on both sides. But it's really important that we come up with measures, solutions, financial interventions that make a difference. I think last night's intervention was, I think, a step in the right direction. But look, we need to keep it constant review. We need an additional EU support level as well. And again, can I just finish in the context of what I said earlier, Fran? A lot of engagement with my office over the last 72 hours. It's just to appeal to people, to absolutely engage with me, absolutely engage with the office, but just to be respectful to my staff, because there's a tone out there, and it's most people engage in a very respectful manner, Fran, but I'm appealing to those others just to lower the tone a small bit, particularly for my staff.
All right, thanks for your time this morning, Michael. Thank you, and good morning to you. As Deputy Michael Murphy speaking to us this morning from our Clonmel studio, 1800 938 007.
Tipp FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Puckon. Main Peugeot dealers in the Premier County. And now stocking the full range of the luxury French car brand DS Automobiles. Book your test drive today with Slattery's Garage, Puckon. See slatterysgarage.ie.